When the king of Jericho sends agents to capture 2 Israelite spies, Rahab hides the men on her roof and deliberately misdirects the authorities, claiming the spies have already left the city. Decades later, the New Testament authors of Hebrews and James single her out. Here is the paradox. The biblical text does not commend Rahab in spite of her deception. She is explicitly praised as a hero of faith and considered righteous directly for the actions that involved a blatant falsehood. This forces a severe analytical question. Are there conceivable circumstances in biblical ethics where it is permissible or even strictly obligatory to deceive? Resolving this tension is impossible if we treat biblical ethics as a rigid list of abstract, contextless rules. To understand Rahab, we have to systematically reconstruct how the Decalogue actually operates. The first step is abandoning the lay assumption that the 9th commandment is simply a blanket prohibition against saying things that are factually untrue. The text does not say, "Thou shalt not lie." The precise phrasing is, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor." The terminology here brings us squarely into the realm of jurisprudence. The first 4 commandments regulate a person's relationship with God. The final 6 regulate horizontal, societal relationships. God protects life in the 6th, marriage in the 7th, and property in the 8th. The 9th commandment exists to enforce the others. It provides the legal apparatus required to maintain a functional court of justice in society. Ancient Israelite judicial procedure, outlined in Deuteronomy 16 and 19, required the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses to establish facts and secure a conviction. Because a witness wielded the power of life and death, the penalty for bearing false witness was severe. If a malicious witness attempted to frame someone, the judges were ordered to inflict the exact punishment on the witness that they had intended for the accused. The specific intent of the 9th commandment is not about reciting factual data into a vacuum. It is about the requirement to use your words to secure justice and protect your neighbor from profound harm. To see how this applies to Rahab, we can test her decision against 4 distinct ethical frameworks. The first is the absolute prohibition model. Championed by scholars like Walter Kaiser, this framework argues that speaking a falsehood is never permissible under any circumstance. In this view, Rahab is commended strictly for her underlying faith in God, and her lie was a sinful, unnecessary addition. To allow for tactical secrecy, this framework makes a strict technical distinction between lying and concealment. When God instructs Samuel to conceal his mission to anoint David by taking a heifer to sacrifice, he was withholding information, not lying. The stress test for this framework comes in extreme historical contexts, particularly under oppressive, totalitarian regimes, where concealment is no longer an option. During World War II, Corrie ten Boom hid Jewish refugees from the Gestapo. Following the absolute prohibition framework, she refused to lie to German soldiers about the people hidden in her home, relying instead on the hope that God would intervene with a spontaneous miracle to blind the agents. The theological vulnerability here is severe. Always speaking literal truth to a hostile actor, while expecting divine intervention to save the innocent party, borders on the sin of testing God, demanding an unsolicited miracle while actively endangering your neighbor. The second framework is situation ethics. This model discards objective moral law entirely, arguing right and wrong are determined subjectively in any given moment by a vague law of love. Because it abandons the fixed standard of biblical law, it fails as a valid framework. The third framework presents the clash of obligations. God generally requires that we hold 2 things in view: objective reality and our neighbor's safety. The anomaly occurs when these collide. What happens when protecting the neighbor requires denying reality, or stating reality destroys the neighbor? The framework resolves this by establishing a hierarchy of moral duty. In extreme circumstances, the obligation to protect human life supersedes the obligation to state factual reality to a threatening force. Rigidly holding to the letter of the law, stating the facts, can actually violate the spirit of the law, which is to protect the neighbor from injustice. Under this model, Rahab's deception is entirely justified. The final framework, Details by Charles Hodge, answers the paradox by redefining a lie. Hodge argues a falsehood is only a lie if the speaker has a moral obligation to speak truth to that hearer. Malicious intent severs this line, forfeiting their right to truth. A military general has no moral obligation to reveal his true tactical movements to an enemy adversary. A homeowner has no moral obligation to tell an armed thief where their valuables are kept. Applied to hostile actors, the agents of an oppressive regime have no moral right to demand facts that they will use to facilitate murder. Because the malicious actor has completely forfeited their right to the truth, actively deceiving them in order to protect life is not a violation of the Ninth Commandment. It is not morally classified as a sin. We can now return to the ancient context of Jericho and evaluate Rahab's decision. The geopolitical landscape of Canaan consisted of highly localized city-states, each ruled by an absolute king. In this era, citizens were under severe legal danger. Regional law explicitly required the public to report outlaws and subversives to the local ruler. Under Hammurabi's code, the penalty for failing to report an outlaw was death. Rahab's deception was a highly dangerous, calculated act of treason against her own king in order to align herself with the God of Israel. Viewed through the clash of obligations and the forfeited right to truth, Rahab flawlessly executed the true intent of the Ninth Commandment. She weaponized deception to prevent the king of Jericho from executing an unjust murder. In the immediate aftermath of the espionage, the Israelites approach a flooded Jordan River. As the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant step into the water, the river stops flowing entirely, allowing the nation to cross. God uses this highly visible, miraculous crossing to completely paralyze the surrounding Canaanite kings with fear, neutralizing their will to attack. Israel makes camp at Gilgal, but their very first act in hostile territory is not a military strike. It is a highly vulnerable theological reset. Utilizing flint knives, Joshua physically restores the covenant by circumcising the entire new generation of Israelite men who had been born during the wilderness wanderings. Once the ritual requirements are met, they observe the Passover for the first time in nearly 4 decades. From Rahab's calculated deception in Jericho to the flint knives drawn at Gilgal, biblical ethics is never about passively reciting factual data. It is the active and sometimes deeply dangerous work of constructing relational justice and protecting covenant faithfulness.